Wyoming Territory, August 1879. The dust hadn't settled in the town of Red Fern when the preacher's daughter was thrown out of her own home. Liora Prescott stood barefoot in the alley behind her family's clapboard house, an old flour sack clutched to her chest. It held everything she owned: a threadbare dress, a Bible with half the pages gone, and a small tin of pencils and drawings she had never shown anyone. Her father's voice still rang in her ears loud, sharp as glass. "You are not what God made you to be," he had said. "You are no daughter of mine." She had not cried. Not when her mother turned away. Not when her brothers stood silent. But now, under the fading orange sky, she stared at the empty road stretching west and felt something break inside. No one in Red Fern wanted a girl who drew pictures of horses with wings, or read about volcanoes instead of cooking, or asked why God would make her love the way she did if he did not mean her to live like this. She had never fit in, and now they had made sure she never would. She started walking. The land outside town was dry and wide, the grass brittle under her feet. Coyotes howled somewhere in the distance. By nightfall, the wind had picked up and Leora's hands were shaking from cold and fear. She found a half-rotten barn a mile off the road and curled up in the hay, her sack clutched to her chest, her ribs aching from hunger. She did not sleep. By dawn, she was ready to keep walking. She did not know where, only that she could not go back. 2 days passed. On the third day, her legs gave out along a dried creek bed. Her lips were cracked, and her breath came shallow. She had not eaten in nearly 30 hours. She leaned against a willow tree, her vision going black around the edges. That was when she heard a horse's hooves. She blinked up through the dust. A man sat atop a tall sorrel gelding, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. He looked like he belonged to no one, coat dusty, shirt torn at the sleeve, eyes sharp as flint. He dismounted fast, his boots hitting the ground with a thud. "Hey," he said, crouching beside her. "You alive?" "I think so," Liora rasped. He pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and tipped it to her lips. She drank like she had never tasted water before. He let her, quiet and patient, until she pulled back. "What's your name?" he asked. "Liora Prescott." He nodded. "I'm Ira Penley." She coughed, voice hoarse. "You a bounty hunter?" He grinned a little. "No, just a drifter." Liora stared at him. "Why'd you stop?" "You looked like you needed someone to stop." She wanted to believe that was enough. Ira helped her onto his horse and walked beside it until they reached a small camp tucked between cottonwoods. He had a fire pit, a bedroll, and a pot of beans warming over coals. He gave her a blanket, half his food, and did not ask questions until after she had eaten. "You running from someone?" he asked finally. "Not someone," she whispered. "Everyone." He nodded like he understood. Because maybe he did. That night, Liora fell asleep under the stars for the first time without fear. Ira sat nearby, whittling a stick into nothing, his eyes flicking to her every few minutes. When she stirred in her sleep, he added wood to the fire. When she shivered, he laid his coat over her. The next day, she tried to leave. He stopped her with one sentence. "You do not have to go just because you're used to being sent away." She looked at him, eyes wide. "I am different," she said quietly. "Good," he answered. They rode together for the next few days, heading west with no real plan. Liora started to laugh again, soft at first, surprised at herself. She sketched things she saw, the curve of a hawk's wings, the way Ira's horse leaned into the wind. She showed him one shyly. He stared at it for a long time. "You draw like you see more than most." No one ever said that before. Well, they should have. He did not just say it. He meant it. By the 7th day, Liora had forgotten what it felt like to be nothing. Ira never called her strange. He never flinched when she talked about the things she liked: books, stars, questions that had no answers. He listened. He smiled. Once, He brushed her hair back behind her ear without thinking, and she felt it down to her bones. They set up camp one night near the Colorado border. Ira built a fire while Liora laid out the blankets. The sun was dipping low, and the air had turned gold. "Ira," she said, looking up at him, "why are you alone?" He shrugged. "I was not always." She waited. "My wife died. Long time ago. Took our son with her." Leora's breath caught. "I am sorry." He nodded, jaw tight. "After that, I did not see much point in staying anywhere too long." She reached for his hand. He looked down, surprised, but let her take it. "You saved my life," she said. "I do not know how to thank you." "I think you already did." They sat like that until the stars came out. Neither of them let go. The next morning, Liora woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Ira humming low under his breath. She watched him from beneath the blanket, how he moved, how he smiled at the fire like it had said something kind. And she knew. She was not going anywhere. She walked up behind him, laid a hand on his shoulder. He looked up at her, and something passed between them. Quiet. Certain. "You are not like anyone I have ever known," he said. "I have been told that before," she whispered. "They meant it like it was a curse." He stood, stepped in close. "I mean it like it is the best thing about you." She did not speak. She just leaned into him, and he caught her like he had always meant to. And for the first time in her life, Liora Prescott believed that being different might be the reason she was still alive. Because somewhere out in the dust and silence of the West, a man who had lost everything had looked at her and said without words, "You are perfect." And she believed him. They crossed into Colorado territory by late afternoon, the land rising into pine-covered ridges and soft, sloping valleys. Ira led them along an old game trail that skirted the edge of the hills, where the grass grew thick and the wind spoke in low, steady breaths through the trees. Liora rode behind him now, knees tucked up, her eyes tracing the folds of land like lines on a map she was learning from the ground up. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't heavy. It just fit. They made camp higher than usual that night, on a flat knoll where the wind couldn't reach them. Ira tied the horses to a cluster of aspen, then pulled 2 blankets from his pack and spread them beside the fire circle. Liora gathered wood, her fingers stained with pine sap and dirt by the time she returned. "I saw rabbit tracks. South slope," she said, crouching beside him. "Think you can catch one?" She looked up. "I could try." He handed her his knife, the handle worn smooth with years of use. "I'll clean it if you do," he said. She didn't hesitate. She returned 30 minutes later with a thin, gray rabbit hanging from a loop of twine. Her cheeks were flushed from the run, her braid half unraveled. "You're handy," Ira said, taking the animal from her. "I had to be. My brothers didn't like when I asked for help." He didn't say anything to that. Just skinned the rabbit clean, salted it, and set it to slow roast over the fire. Liora leaned her back against a rock, tucking her knees to her chest. The smoke curled around her face as she watched him. "You've been farther west than this?" she asked. He nodded without looking up. "All the way to Nevada. Even saw the ocean once." "What was it like?" "Loud. Endless. Smelled like rust and wind." She smiled faintly. "I used to pretend the prairie was an ocean. When I was little." He glanced at her, the firelight catching the lines near his eyes. "You still pretend?" "Only when I'm drawing." "You ever drawn the ocean?" "Only how I imagined it." Before tonight, I hadn't met anyone who'd seen it. The rabbit cooked slow. Ira passed her the first piece, and for a while, they ate without words. Later, she set her sketch tin beside her and opened the lid. Her fingers paused over the paper. "May I?" she asked. He nodded once. She began to draw by firelight. Her hand moved quickly, with a kind of quiet certainty, as if she wasn't thinking so much as remembering. Ira didn't look until she finished. When she turned it toward him, he stared. It was the knoll they sat on, but from above his horse grazing in the corner, the fire's glow against the trees, and himself, seated with the knife in hand. But it wasn't just accurate. It felt like it had been seen from the inside out. "I didn't know I looked like that," he said. "How do you mean?" "Like I belong somewhere." She looked down. "Maybe you belong here." He didn't answer right away. The wind shifted, and the firelight flickered across her face. "What did you want to be before?" She didn't pretend not to understand. "A teacher, maybe. Or a naturalist like the ones who write about plants and birds. I used to read about them in the newspapers when I could find scraps." "You'd have been good at it." "I still might be." He reached toward her sketch tin and closed it gently. "You will be." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You say things like they're facts." He met her eyes. "That's how I feel." The fire burned low. She didn't move closer, not yet. But she didn't move away. In the morning, they packed slowly. There was no rush. Ira adjusted the saddle cinch while Liora folded the blankets, her hands steady, her eyes scanning the ridgeline. "There's a town maybe 2 days from here," he said. "Smaller than Redfern. Folks pass through, don't stay long." She looked up. "You want to go there?" He nodded. "There's a woman there. Widow. Runs a boarding house. She lets me use the shed out back when I pass through." "Would she take me too?" "She might. If I ask." Liora gave a small nod. "Then let's go." They rode without hurry, the horses setting their own pace. By mid-afternoon, they came upon a creek lined with alder trees. Ira dismounted first and led his gelding to water. Liora followed, boots crunching over the gravel. She knelt and cupped the water in her hands, the cold biting her palms. As she stood, Ira was watching her. "What is it?" she asked. "You don't flinch." She tilted her head. "Should I?" "Most folks who've been hurt that much do." "I flinch on the inside," she said quietly. "But it doesn't help anything." He nodded once, slowly, like he understood. They made it to the town just after sundown the next day. The boarding house was a long, narrow building with a porch that tilted a little to the left. A single lamp burned in the window, and the smell of biscuits drifted out with the breeze. The widow, a short woman with hair tied back in a tight bun, opened the door. She saw Ira first, then Liora, then the horse. "Same shed as before?" she asked. "If you don't mind," he said. She nodded. "I'll bring out food once I've cleared supper." They settled into the shed together. It was tight, but dry. There were 2 piles of hay and a stack of old quilts in the corner. No one said anything about the fact that they didn't set up separate beds. Liora unrolled her blanket and set her tin beside it. She didn't draw that night. She just sat with her back against the wall, knees pulled up, watching Ira as he unlaced his boots. "Ira," she said softly. He looked over. "Do you believe people are born wrong?" "No," he said without pause. She let out a breath, then laid down and turned to face the wall. He didn't touch her. But when he lay down beside her, she reached back, blindly, and his hand found hers in the dark. They didn't speak again that night. But the silence was full of something solid. Something starting. The boarding house shed had no windows, only slats in the wall that let in the scent of damp earth and the morning stirrings of chickens. Light filtered through slowly, and by the time Liora opened her eyes, Ira had already gone. His bedroll was neatly folded, his boots gone from their place by the door. She sat up, brushing straw from her sleeve. The air inside was cool, and for a moment, she listened to the scrape of a chair on the porch, the clink of dishes beyond the kitchen wall, the sound of a man's footsteps returning. When Ira came in, he carried a tin plate covered with a square of muslin. He set it down beside her without speaking and unwrapped it, a slice of cornmeal cake, a boiled egg, and a wedge of dried apple. She said you looked half-starved, he said, crouching. Didn't argue when I asked for more. Liora took the plate slowly, her hands still stiff from sleep. How long were you gone? Before the sun rose. I help her bring in firewood when I pass through. She's not the kind to forget a favor. She ate without rushing, and he waited until she was done before rising again. There's a man here, he said. Name's Cale Danton. Runs a supply cart out of the livery. He's looking for someone to help him keep his books and read through contracts. You think he'd take me? I think if I ask, he will. Liora stood, brushing her skirts. I can read contracts. I've studied a few. He nodded, then opened the shed door. Then come meet him. The air outside carried the scent of dust and dry hay. The sun sat low behind a ridgeline, but the town was already stirring. Wagons rattled past the narrow lane, and a woman with a laundry basket nodded as they passed. Liora kept close behind Ira, her eyes scanning the wooden storefronts and the narrow alleyways between buildings. The livery was a long, low structure with 2 open stalls and a lean-to feed. Inside, a man with a rounded gut and steady hands sorted bridles into a crate. Danton, Ira called. Got someone who might suit your needs. The man looked up, his gaze settling on Liora. You right clear?
Ida.
Numbers?
I'm fast.
He studied her another few seconds, then turned to Ira. You vouch for her?
Ida.
Danton spat into the dirt. Then she's got the job. It's 2 hours in the morning, 1 in the evening. Pays $1 a week and meals if she stays on. Liora nodded. I'll start today. Danton tossed her a ledger. Sort that by invoice date. Bring it back tonight. She caught the book cleanly, and the man turned back to his bridles. Outside, Ira waited until the door creaked shut behind them. You didn't flinch, he said. I've never had a job that didn't come with a warning. You do now. They walked back without speaking. When they reached the boarding house, he handed her a folded cloth. What's this? Found it in the general store. Old, but it's warm. She unfolded it, a shawl, dark wool threaded with faded green. One edge had been mended, a line of fine stitches running neat and even. I don't have anything to give you back, she said. I didn't ask. She held the shawl to her chest. You always do things like this? No, he said. Only when it matters. That evening, she returned the ledger to Danton, cheeks flushed from the cold. He took it without comment, thumbing through the pages. You write like someone who knows how to listen, he muttered. She left before he could say more. At the shed, Ira had built a small fire in a ring of stones. He sat beside it, his coat laid flat beneath him, a cup of coffee in his hands. Liora knelt beside him, the shawl around her shoulders. Ira, she said quietly, what did you want before you lost them? He didn't look at her right away. I wanted to raise horses. Real ones, not for war or freight, just clean limb stock that could run. She watched his hands tighten around the cup. I had a mare once, he said. Dappled gray. Would have made a fine line. I sold her after. Because it hurt to keep her? Because I didn't believe in anything that could keep going. She reached over, her fingers brushing his knuckles. You believe now.
Ida.
The fire cracked between them, the scent of pine smoke curling upward. Ira, she said, I want to stay. He looked at her fully then. Here. With you. He set the coffee aside. If you're sure, I'll see to it. I'll build us a place, doesn't have to be here. We can ride farther west, find a piece of land where no one asks who you were. I don't want to be hidden. I just want to be seen by someone who knows what I carry. You are, he said. She leaned in slowly, her forehead resting against his. His breath was warm against her skin, his hand rising to her cheek. You're not broken, he whispered. You're brave. I used to think I had to choose between being loved and being myself. You don't, he said. Not with me. The fire burned lower, but neither of them moved away. And under the stars, Liora Prescott knew she had found something not even the ache of the past could undo. A man who'd once lost everything, now offering her the only thing she'd never been given without cost. A place to stay. A name spoken like a promise. A future that fit. The first snow came quiet, dusting the rooftops and fencing rails before the town stirred. Liora stood on the back step of the boarding house, breath rising in pale ribbons, her shawl drawn tight. The light was still blue with morning, and the yard behind the shed lay hushed beneath a thin crust of white. Ira came around the corner with an armload of firewood. He set it down without a word, then straightened, glancing past her toward the frost-laced garden beds. "You ever seen snow fall this early?" she asked. "Not in this part." He brushed pine needles from his coat. "Might be a long winter." She didn't answer right away. "Then, would you want to stay through it?" He stepped closer, eyes steady. "If you're here, I'll stay." Inside, the widow's kitchen clattered to life. Liora could smell the beginnings of cornbread and bacon. Her shift at the livery wouldn't begin for an hour, but she didn't move. "Ira," she said, turning toward him, "if we stay, I want to find work of my own. Not just help Danton. Something that's mine." He nodded. "What do you have in mind?" "There's a schoolhouse in the next valley. I passed it the day we came in. I saw the roof line just before the ridge dropped." He looked out across the empty road. "You think they'd take you?" "Not as a teacher, but maybe to help. I can mend books. I can read with the children who fall behind. You want me to ride out and ask?" "I want to go with you." He didn't hesitate. "Then we'll leave after breakfast." They rode along the frozen trail, the hooves muffled against the hardened earth. The valley opened slow, framed by stands of bare cottonwood and a meandering creek lined with broken ice. The schoolhouse was a square building, gray with weather, its front steps canted but sound. A woman came to the door when they approached. She wore gloves with the fingers cut away and a kerchief tied under her chin. Her eyes passed over Leora's shawl, then lingered on the sketch tin tucked under her arm. "You here to enroll a child?" she asked. "No, ma'am," Liora said. "I'm here to help." The woman narrowed her gaze. "You know scripture?"
Ida.
"And I can write in a straight line." The woman folded her arms. "You from the east?"
No.
"I'm from Wyoming." The woman studied her another moment, then stepped aside.
Come in.
"Let me see how you hold a pen." Liora disappeared into the building. Ira waited beside the horses, his breath fogging in the cold. When she reappeared 20 minutes later, her cheeks were pink from the wood stove's heat. "She said I can come Tuesdays and Fridays," she said. "She's got 3 boys who can't read yet. She said she'll pay in eggs and flour." He smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his mouth but settled somewhere in his chest. "That's a start." They returned to town in silence, save for the wind threading through the trees. At the shed, Liora set her tin down and sat cross-legged on the floor. "Ira." He turned from where he was uncinching the saddle. "I want to build something," she said. "Not just stay warm and pass time. Not just survive." He crossed the room and sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "Then let's find land," he said. "We'll build it from the ground up." "Would you really do that with me?" "I wouldn't do it with anyone else." She looked down at her hands, then up again. "We don't have much saved. I've got enough for nails and timber. More if I take a few horses south come spring and sell them. I can trade sketches in town, or mend books for the church." He nodded. "We'll make it work." Her voice dropped. "They called me selfish. Said I was unnatural." "I don't care what they called you." She glanced at him. "Why not?" "Because I've seen what you are when no one's looking. And it's good." Her fingers brushed his. He let them twine. That night, they lay beneath their quilt, the fire gone to embers. He reached for her only once, when she turned in her sleep. A quiet touched her back, his palm warming the space between her shoulder blades. In the dark, she whispered, "I never thought I'd be wanted." "I don't want you," he said. "I need you." She turned toward him, her forehead resting lightly against his. "Then let's build our home," she murmured, "and never leave it behind." And he said yes, not with words, but with the steady press of his hand against hers, the quiet vow of a man who knew the worth of what was given when there was no one left to give it but him. The land they chose lay 3 miles west of the boarding house, tucked between 2 low hills and a narrow creek that never quite dried out, even in August. It wasn't much, just a stretch of tangled grass, a stand of wind-bent cottonwoods, and a scatter of flat stone near the bank, but it was theirs. Ira traded 2 of his saddles and a winter's worth of chopped wood for the claim. They signed the deed in the back of the county clerk's barn, Leora's name penned in thin, deliberate letters beside his. They built the cabin slow, in the rhythm of early frost and short daylight. The first beams went up before the ground hardened, Ira sawing each post by hand while Liora hauled stone for the hearth. She worked without complaint, even when the wind bit through her sleeves or the hammer left blistered moons across her palms. They spoke less while they built, not from silence but from purpose. Every nail sunk, every board hewn, carried weight. One afternoon, as she laid down the first line of the hearth, she looked up, breath rising in short puffs. "This doesn't feel borrowed," she said. He set his hands on his knees, watching her. "No," he replied. "It feels earned." By the time snow lay in thick sheets across the hills, the walls stood solid. The door hung level. The roof kept out wind. A narrow chimney rose from the back wall, and inside, they'd fitted a cook stove traded from a farmer who'd lost his wife and no longer wanted to cook alone. Liora lined the windowsill with smooth stones she'd found near the creek, each one scrubbed clean with a rag and warm water. The night they moved in, she stood in the doorway a long while, watching the fire glow across the floorboards. Then she crossed the room and placed her tin of drawings on a shelf Ira had carved into the wall. "You'll draw here?" he asked. "I'll do everything here," she said. They slept that night on a mattress of straw and wool, the kind that held warmth close. Ira lay beside her, not touching at first. Then, as the wind brushed against the shutters and the fire dropped to coals, she turned toward him. "Ira," she whispered, "I don't want to be afraid of wanting more." "You won't need to be," he said. She reached for his hand beneath the quilt, lacing her fingers with his. "I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to feed chickens and keep track of the days and come home to you when I've been gone too long." He didn't answer right away. Then softly, "You will?" "Ira?" "Yes. I'm ready to love you. You already do." In the months that followed, they planted a small garden near the creek. Liora carved rows into the thawed soil with her hands, her nails packed with earth, while Ira built a fence to keep the deer out. They didn't talk about the life they'd had before. There was no need. Everything they needed was growing between them quietly and without permission. In spring, the widow from the boarding house came to visit, bringing a basket of salt pork and a spool of blue thread. "She's a rare one," she told Ira when Liora went to fetch water. "I hope you're steady enough for her." "I hope I'm the last thing she ever has to hold tight to," he said. That summer, Liora began teaching twice a week in the Valley schoolhouse. She walked there each morning with a satchel of papers and came home with ink on her fingertips. At night, she read aloud by lamplight real things. Excerpts from Darwin, letters from women who'd gone west alone, the odd clipped column from a Boston journal she'd found in a trader's wagon. Ira listened, usually with his hands busy repairing a harness, carving a handle, but always with his eyes on her. She read with her whole body, her voice lifting and folding with the words, and he never interrupted. One evening, she looked up mid-sentence and caught him watching her. "What is it?" she asked. I like the sound of your voice when you're telling the truth. She smiled, setting the paper down. I only tell the truth now. Years passed, not in haste, but in the slow, full rhythm of a life built by hand. The cabin took on the shape of their days, a second chair carved for the porch, a shelf above the stove for her dried herbs, a line of notches on the back door marking the seasons. They didn't mark anniversaries or count the years. They marked firsts. The first time the creek froze flat enough to cross, the first peach from a tree they thought wouldn't bear, the first night they stayed up talking until the fire died and they had to start it again before sunrise. They never left the land. Not fully. Ira took the occasional trip for trade, sometimes gone 2 or 3 days, but always back before the next rain. Liora kept teaching, added sketching lessons for the older children, and once, when the teacher took sick, ran the whole school for a month. They never spoke vows before a preacher. But one spring morning, Liora set a ring of woven birch bark on Ira's plate, and he wore it through planting season until it dried and split. He made her one in return from horsehair and willow thread, and she kept it pinned inside her shawl. One winter evening, many years on, as they sat beside the fire, Liora leaned her head against his shoulder. I used to think I'd never be safe enough to grow old, she murmured. I used to think I'd only ever remember what I'd lost, he said. She reached up, brushed her fingers along his jaw. We proved ourselves wrong. He turned his head, kissed her knuckles. We proved the whole world wrong. Outside, the wind carried the hush of snow across the roof. Inside, the fire burned steady, and their hands stayed entwined. And they stayed through every season, through every change. Together, in a home they built with bare hands and open hearts, they lived the rest of their lives in the quiet, certain knowing that love, when honest and hard-earned, never needed to be spoken to be believed.